Hey there, folks. So I've had quite a few comments about the penny table that I built about a year or 18 months ago now. So yeah, it gets really good comments, really good talking point in the room, and it's pretty easy to do actually as well. So just thought I'd put together a quick video on how I built it. So the first thing you need to consider is the kind of table you're going to use. And one of the key concerns when you're choosing the table is ideally getting something that's got like a rim around the edge that forms a like a natural kind of depression in the table where the pennies can sit down inside. And this really helps. And if the table hasn't actually got that, you're going to need to look into maybe building something around the edge, the perimeter basically of the table to retain what ends up being filled in. With this table, I used some wooden trim that I just got from a local DIY store. So you see it here, and it's quite thin wooden trim. And I finished that with just paint that's got a crackle effect on it actually. Just knock up so you see that there. So the corners on this, cutting the corners was quite difficult. You've got to be really accurate. So I did mess it up slightly, had to use a bit of filler on it in places, but didn't turn out too badly. Stuck this onto the table with no nails. That sounds really simple, but I need to mention possibly something else about that shortly. The table itself, this is from IKEA. I think it's a lac table, it's called. So, but you know, you've got a second-hand table possibly would be a good choice. But as I say, always look for something ideally that's already got that sort of slight lip around the edge. So anyway, assuming that you've found your table or you've put your trim on, then you're looking at your pennies or any other kind of coins, to be fair. With when it comes to your coins, you just need to be aware that if you're thinking of like mixing different kinds of coins, it does potentially mess up your pattern somewhat. So I just went with this because it fits together really nice and closely, and in this particular pattern as well, it does interlock nicely. If you were sort of to put them pennies anyway in a sort of square shape, like 4 in a square, it leaves a bigger gap. So you just need to sort of consider that really, and just play around with your coins when you get a load actually, and sort of mess around with your patterns. And I did get a load that I cleaned actually with vinegar, but although they looked really good initially, they then sort of they went like almost a pink colour because I think it destroyed the patina that had built up on them. So in the end, I just chose to not clean them and have this mixture, which I think kind of looks more interesting anyway. And I got my pennies, most of them I had saved up, but then I went and got some pound coins changed in a local bank. I think post offices might do it as well. So that's one way to get pennies. I think there's 1,350 on this table, as I recall from working it out by the counting each side and multiplying it. And I did have to cut a load as well to fit in the edges, as you can see. Used a pair of tin snips for that. Yeah, it took a while, hurt my hand, needed quite a bit of effort, but got there in the end. Obviously be careful when you're doing that. So moving on, once the pennies are all, you've decided on your pattern, you've got all your pennies. I stuck mine down with like a tiny little blob of no nails on the back of each one. And in retrospect, I did use possibly a little bit too much. You've got to be careful it doesn't sort of splurge out from underneath the penny, because that interferes when you come to use the grout in the next stage. You see the odd tiny little white bit, and that is the no nails that came through from underneath. Do need to stick them down though really, because the next stage when you put your grout on, black tile grout I used, you sort of have to smear this on top of them and then sort of scrape it across to fill the gaps in. And if the pennies aren't stuck down, it could sort of dislodge them, and it'd make a hell of a mess, that would, because the grout is pretty messy. Actually, at that stage, I did mask off all the edging as well, just to make sure it didn't get all over the place. So when you've smeared your black grout all over it, I used a single tub. I think it took about 3/4 of a single tub. Then you need to wipe the excess off. Scrape as much of the excess off as you can, but then you're going to need a damp cloth to repeatedly wipe over it to get the before it dries, because if it dries in any significant residue, it'll be rock solid. It's quite a satisfying process actually doing that, because you see the pennies come up really nice and shiny. I definitely think it looks better with the black grout on it. Really brings out the copper colours of the pennies. So when that's all done, that's all dried, then you should hopefully have like a gap on top of your pennies of say 1 to 2 millimeters to the top of your trim. And the other thing actually with your trim, you need to make sure it's level all around, because the next stage is you're going to pour your liquid acrylic on. So when you pour your liquid acrylic on, if it's not level, it's going to pour over one of the edges, or it's going to accumulate in one corner. So you need to be doing it on a flat level surface, and obviously you need to make sure your table's flat and level too. Not a problem that with like an IKEA table, because they're made pretty much to precise measurements. But and going back to sticking the trim on, one thing you need to do is make sure that you've got a complete bead of whatever sealant you've used to stick on the trim to the side of the table. Because what I did, I must have left like a gap in it, put blobs on and then pushed it on. And when you put your sealant on, if there's any gaps, the sealant actually seeps down through, and it started like dripping out. This is the table here, and this is the trim here. So it started dripping out. So I had to like put a dish underneath it, and it did lose some of the resin. The resin I actually used for this is called Glass Cast, and it's Glass Cast 3 that I used. It's quite expensive actually. I can't remember, it's either 20 to 30 quid I think it was to cover the table this size with a depth of literally just like 2 millimeters. So that's why it's really important to get your level right of your trim. Otherwise, end up using like, a massive depth of acrylic. You just want just enough to cover it. So it turned out pretty well actually. I think just losing that tiny little bit of acrylic resulted in, you can maybe just make out there's some tiny like little pits between the pennies in places. It's really hard to make out actually, and you're looking at it in a certain light. But that's, I could have done with maybe a tiny little bit more acrylic on it. But no, it turned out really well, like I say, and it's pretty hard wearing as well. You can't put hot drinks directly on it. I wouldn't want to risk that, because it'd leave like a ring, and potentially if you left a hot drink on there for a long time, that would be permanent. It's got a few scratches on it, nothing serious though. As I say, it's been like a proper working coffee table with a couple of kids, not being particularly gentle with it for a good year to 18 months I think it is now, and it's stood up pretty well to that really. Just give it a wipe over occasionally. So anyway, going back to the acrylic, once you've poured that on, I covered it over with a suspended sheet of material to stop any dust settling on it. Obviously you can't have something that's in contact with the surface, so I think I used some like foam board actually, so that was suspended over it to stop anything like settling down onto the table. And as I recall, it took about 24 hours for it to harden. and it needs to be at a certain temperature to do that as well, just like room temperature. 21 degrees Celsius is ideal for that. It didn't particularly give off any particularly strong fumes or anything when it was doing that, so I just closed it off in a different room, left it alone, and it's amazing. Air bubbles you don't have to worry about, because you do get little air bubbles in this acrylic, pour on acrylic, but in this product anyway, they just rise out on their own, and there's not a single one in this. So you can have really good fun with it as well, actually. I did manage to find a couple of unusual pennies that I incorporated into it, and it's kind of fun telling people that and getting them to find those pennies. Lots of different like ages of them as well. I've got any more unusual ones on here, but that's it. Sky's the limit, really. You can use different kinds of coins and play around with it. I did think about doing like a silver strip with 5p's around it, but as I say, they don't tessellate with the pennies in any regularity, so it makes it really difficult to do. So that's it. Hope you found this video useful. If anyone's got any questions, just post it in the comments, obviously, and don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to the channel for some more sort of DIY projects and that sort of thing. So that's it. Bye, folks.